Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Australian Indian Radio, and right now the topic that people have all been talking about, or people are quite worried about, and probably have a little bit of misinformation about, is the travel ban from India. And with that, in our studio, we are fortunate to have Minister Hawke with us. Minister, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Unma.
And okay, so moving on with the show, I mean, looking at this travel ban, of course, many people are probably not aware why and how it came about.
Yeah, so the government announced that we would have a travel pause until the 15th of May. And I hear what you say there. There's been some misunderstanding about that. So it is a pause. It's not a ban for the long term or the medium term. It's certainly a pause in arrangements based on the health advice the Australian government received about, sadly, India becoming our first high-risk country rated by our health agencies. And that's a very sad development, and you know, all of our hearts go out to India at the moment with so many cases and so many deaths. It's impacting a lot of people here in Australia and their families as well. And we understand how serious the situation is. So what the government needs to do now, while we have that pause, is reset our quarantine and travel arrangements to deal with some new strains of the virus that are spreading through India. Also the logistics of safe people that don't get infections on planes and in quarantine with repatriated flights. So some time to set our arrangements, but of course we'll have more to say on the 15th of May about the resumption of those arrangements and moving vulnerable people from India, citizens of Australia, back to here safely into quarantine without any risk to the Australian community.
And I think that's what you have mentioned there of it being a pause. So maybe that is what people are. Some of the people, not all, but might not have been very clear on. All that was coming to their mind was Indians ban, there's a ban on travelling, and there's a fee that they have to pay, and it's now a criminal offence to come. So maybe that is what has been probably a sticking point out there, rather than that what it was, intended for. So maybe the communication, as we discussed, might have been or could have been a little bit better.
Yeah, well, there was some unfortunate focus on the issue of penalties, but the government changed the penalties at the beginning of the pandemic about March last year. That applies to everybody under our Biosecurity Act from every country. If you breach the Biosecurity Act, it's a maximum penalty available to the government. It was never intended to be targeted at India or Indian people. That's not the case. All that changed was the assessment of India as a high risk as they hit the 400,000 cases a day mark and many thousands of people tragically dying without the access to healthcare. It does mean we have to take very seriously the situation, and I'm finding in the community understanding of that. Understanding we had to take a tough decision, which isn't easy sometimes to make these decisions. Sometimes there's both ways risk, and we understand there's a bit of risk to citizens in India, but we have to protect Australia as well as reset arrangements so that we can resume those repatriations very safely. And we repatriated many thousands of people from India in the course of the last year, and we had 8 scheduled flights were scheduled in May before this announcement. So we're hoping to go back to a schedule that will make sure we can get vulnerable people out, and that we have an expanded quarantine arrangement that is safe with proper testing on all the flights to get people here. But the penalties is really for egregious breaches by anybody that deliberately decide to circumvent our arrangements. But that applies to everybody in the world, not particularly to India.
So that penalty is not unique to this case, and it was in place always.
Yeah, the penalties since March last year, we changed them last year, March, to make them tougher just for the whole pandemic, so that if someone deliberately circumvented all our biosecurity with the disease and spread it in Australia and it led to thousands of deaths and we knew that was deliberate or egregious, we could properly prosecute that person, but act as a deterrent. But it's nothing to do with the particular situation in India.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that, Minister, because that might have been one of the misconceptions which is out there, that it was never there, but it was just been put in place for India. Okay, so moving forward, what are the plans in place for the 15th?
Yeah, so even today we have meetings about more advice about the preparations that are underway in the quarantine side here, with the airlines and the airport testing regimes, and of course in India ourselves, our post in Delhi and our consular services, and how ready we are to move people often from villages or towns or safely to the airports and have them tested and onto planes. It's quite complex logistically when as all your viewers know, that India is going through many hundreds of thousands of cases. The health system's under strain. There's a lot of work to do, so we're working through that even today to be ready for announcement on the 15th so we can resume some movement. We do need the help of the community, as we've discussed. We want them to be able to identify vulnerable people in India who are Australian citizens that need to move because of comorbidities, because they're elderly, because they want to move right now and have challenges. Help us with making sure all that information is registered with our post in Delhi and the consular services, so that when we're ready to resume flights, they'll be a high priority on our list.
Okay, so that is wonderful. And one of the points that people were asking is that why the 15th? What was so magical about the date? How did we come to 15?
Well, the advice was we needed a pause to get our quarantine arrangements and the relationship to national regimes into place. And, a period of time was chosen that could give us the time to get that done. It is hard when you're talking about third-party airlines and third-party airports in Doha or Dubai, plus working with India, because we want to make sure at the moment when we're talking to India, we're helping them with everything we can help them with, like medical supplies, not trying to put strain on the Indian system. It's very difficult. Every country finds it difficult, whether it's the US or Brazil or the UK. When they're in the peak of their waves, we try and be as sensitive as possible, because so many people are losing their life every day. It's a very difficult time.
It is difficult indeed, and of course, moving forward, looking at some of the citizens who might be stuck there, if they become seriously ill, so what's the provision for them?
Well, we have to work with that. If they're sick with something else, we'll obviously try and repatriate them quickly. If they're with coronavirus, it'll have to be well managed in place. There'll be plans from the consulate there to assist where we can. It is a risk being in another country at the moment, and we all know that. Australians have left Australia knowing there is risk. We're one of the very few countries in the world that has virtually no COVID and no cases, and we have to remember most of the world is suffering deaths, disease, sickness and challenges to their system. So we'll help wherever we can, but often we're asking people to be, if you need to return, you'll have to try and stay isolated and stay safe, and we will work with you to repatriate you as quickly as possible. But obviously people have had to make complex choices. People are in India for good reason, sometimes to care for family members or to look after their businesses or other things. It's very difficult sometimes for people, we understand that, but people can get sick in a pandemic, and that's why we'd like to get the vulnerable people back to Australia as quickly as possible. And at the moment we estimate about 900. I think there could be some more vulnerable people out there. That's why we need your community here in Australia to help us make sure we've got the best information possible about the vulnerable people in India.
And thank you very much for that, Minister. And when you mentioned about people coming back now, of course we are very fortunate here in Australia and one of the best countries. We've managed the COVID so well so far. Coming back to the flights that will probably resume, or the repatriation flights that will start once we start getting the citizens back. What would be the quarantine procedure, or what will they have to go through quarantine? Well,
look, all those arrangements will be finally announced on the 15th. We're considering those things even today, but we have announced that you'll need 2 separate negative tests. That's med advice about these strains of the virus. They're 2 separate, different quality tests administered. People are safe on those planes, and there'll be further announcements. But obviously, we'll be working to repatriate people as fast as we can within the health limitations, especially vulnerable people.
Minister, thank you so much, very much for your time today. So, just before I let you go, or is there any concluding remarks that you'd like to make to our viewers and listeners?
Look, I just want to thank the community for the way they're helping. We do need to think about what we can do for people in India at the moment, and the fundraising I've been invited to, I think, is a good way to help medical services. And look, we do understand why people are anxious and worried. I've heard a lot from people who've lost many relatives in the course of this pandemic in India. Again, we're all very now need to help India, and we're certainly those suppliers won't provide they go through this difficult time.
Thank you very much for that update, Minister. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. No, thank you for the opportunity.